Part 2, Vendetta's Edge. Chapter 45. Ellicard gazed at the old willow tree. The dry, leathery bark had moss sparsely growing on its north side. Its leaves drooped, providing a small shelter from the blistering sun. The water from the small fishing pond gently caressed its roots. Jetta sat on a low-hanging bough, beckoning Ellicard to sit by her. Her blue summer dress waved in the breezy air. White lace hemmed the end of her seams. Her auburn hair was tied into a loose ponytail, complete with an adorable yellow ribbon.
Ellicard, come sit with me. It's a beautiful day, don't you think?
Ellicard cautiously stepped closer, but stopped just short of his lifelong friend. She called out to him again, her voice softer, almost a whisper.
Ellicard, come sit with me. It's a beautiful day, don't you think?
Her voice was scratchy and labored as she spoke again. It was though only some of her words were vocalized, while others were making nothing more than gargled chokes.
Ellicard, come with. Beautiful day. Think?
Ellicard gasped in horror and stumbled backward as a thin red line spread across Jetta's throat. Blood seeped from the thin wound slowly at first, but soon the blood was gushing forth, tearing the pulsing wound wide open. Her eyes grew wide, and she teared up, reaching forward, yearning for her friend. "I'm sorry, Jetta. Please, stay with me," Ellicard shouted as he ran to catch her falling body from a tree branch. However, when her body collapsed into a heap in his arms, it wilted like a flower turned to ash, sending fragments of her broken body floating in the air like a fine smoke. Ellicard choked up as hot tears bubbled in his eyes. His hands tightened into fists. An unfamiliar voice echoed within his scattering, dreary thoughts. "His fever is spiking." Marcus lifted his hands off Ellicard's clammy forehead. Moans shakily escaped the dying elf. Wicker hurried to get his father a washcloth, freshly drenched in ice water. He sneered at the battered elf's body, squirming about in the bed. "Father, we should just let him die. He doesn't deserve our help." "Wicker, we talked about this. We are not executioners, we are men of law. By Shadeo's blade, we shall not let him die until we have healed him and brought him to justice." "He assassinated King Jalen. He had Averin killed. My brother, your own damn son." Marcus snapped his head at Wicker, his eyes flaring. "You think I need you to remind me of that? You think I don't want to break this elf's neck?" "No," Wicker spoke quietly, avoiding his father's gaze. "Louder," Marcus commanded. "No," Wicker shouted instinctively as if he were a white cloak once more. Marcus let out a labored sigh. He too had fought the urge to let Ellicard die, but he knew that this could be the opportunity he had been waiting for. A chance for Long Whisper to be rid of the Black Rabbit menace, once and for all. To that end, Ellicard could yet prove to be an invaluable ally. "Wicker, the truth is," he began. He knew that telling Wicker his plan would not go over well. He knew that it was taking every fiber in Wicker's body to restrain him from killing Ellicard, but he also knew that his son trusted him above all else. "The truth is, I have plans for Ellicard beyond bringing him to justice." Wicker shook his head. He had suspected as much. "Wicker, this elf's been ripped apart for a reason. Maybe the rabbits turned on him. Perhaps we could convince him to side with us. He owes us his life," Marcus said, mostly attempting to persuade his son to join his cause, and partly to convince himself that he had not lost his mind. "I can't believe you. I can't even talk to you right now." Wicker began to pace around the tiny bedroom. His brother was dead, his cloak stripped from him, and his life was in shambles, all because of Ellicard. Now his father was telling him that he had to save Ellicard. "We are out of sunwort root. We could also use some more bandages." Marcus spoke quietly, as if ignoring Wicker's anger. "Head to the old guild hall. It's a military outpost these days. Tell them you're my son. Get sunwort root for his fever, bandages, and try to scrounge up some doleweed for his pain." "Yeah, we wouldn't want him to suffer," Wicker mumbled under his breath. His father didn't seem to catch the comment. "We went through a week's worth of medical supplies in 3 days. Make sure to pick up double. Take the cart. but do not tell them who we are treating. Wicker curled his lip defiantly at first, but then nodded when he met his father's stern gaze. Make haste, boy. The old guild hall was once a common destination for the weary travelers on the roads of Long Whisper. The White Cloaks often shared their lavish feats with those in need. From the winter's moon to the summer solstice, the guild hall was always ready to accommodate anyone with tired feet and time to hear a story of challenge and triumph. These days, the banners that once hung from its stone walls had long since fallen. The once welcoming doors were now hidden by a crude wood pike wall. The aroma of fine-baked goods was now the rancid stench of burning stew. Wicker stopped his cart just outside the gates of the crudely constructed walls. A guard inspected the empty cart before prying a few answers from a tired Wicker. What brings you to the outpost, Wolfcry? Wicker looked up at the weathered guild hall, remembering the time he had spent safe within its walls. Calling it Outpost Wolfcry salted a still open wound. The wound that he was no longer a White Cloak, and that the building no longer belonged to his White Cloak family. Is that what it's called these days? Huffed Wicker. Are you from around here? Wicker nodded. I live a night's travel north of here. My family has run out of medical supplies and we are in need of them. The guard looked Wicker up and down. Not only was he no elf, but he was clearly a foreigner. You sure you're from around here? I don't have time for these games. I am in urgent need of medical supplies. General Marcus Newson sent me. The guard snapped to attention, as if Marcus himself were sitting at Wicker's side. General Newson sent you. I am his son, Wicker said flatly. The guard called for the wooden gates to be opened before hastily turning back to Wicker. Sorry for the trouble, sir. Wicker shook his head. Why did this task bother him so much? Perhaps it had less to do with fetching supplies for someone that he wanted to let die and more to do with the lack of notoriety he had with these new soldiers. He was once a sergeant in the guard of the White Cloaks. His very presence demanded respect. Now he commanded nothing. As he steered the cart next to the quartermaster, he gawked at the amount of travelers and children that crowded the inner outpost. A staggering line of elves in ragged attire waited for a large iron cauldron of boiling beef stew. The quartermaster was busy too. Wicker stood in the crowd, waiting as soldiers passed out fresh clothes and blankets to the travel-worn elves. Wicker caught the attention of a passing guard. Who are these people? Refugees from Varus. They are traveling north from Sparrowport. Wicker mapped out Long Whisper in his head. Sparrowport was a large coastal city to the south that bordered the Serpent Sea. Long Whisper is gearing up to go to war alongside Varus. That's one reason why the refugees are headed north instead of taking up residence in Sparrowport. If Estina breaks through Varus, Sparrowport will be the first to be razed, the guard said. King Koda is going to war? Wicker asked. He was wide-eyed in disbelief. The Long Whisper army was in no condition to go to war yet. It was true that recruitment had spiked since the country learned of the Varus-Estina conflict, but the soldiers were still green. You there! What supplies do you need? Shouted the quartermaster, trying to capture Wicker's attention. Wicker snapped out of his daze. Medical supplies. 2 weeks' worth. Sunwort root and bandages mainly. Dullweed, if you can spare some. Wicker found himself drifting back into his thoughts as the quartermaster had a few men load up the cart. Wicker was so wrapped up with Ellicard that he'd forgotten that his father was going to war, and that he would soon be training Long Whisper's recruits. Whatever qualms he had with Ellicard seemed somewhat petty in comparison now. Father, I'm back, Wicker called as he stepped inside. In his arms, he carried a crate of medical supplies. Marcus emerged from the bedroom where Ellicard was still being cared for. His hands were crusted with dried blood. His eyes drooped with dark, heavy bags under them, brushing the sides of his nose. Wicker could tell he had not slept much in the 2 days it had taken him to make the supply run. Wicker rested the crate on a nearby table and let Marcus to his own room. You need sleep, father. I'll watch over the elf. Get some rest. Marcus made no attempt to protest. He needs his bandages changed. I found a small amount of sunwort by the river, but he could use some more. The elf is fighting a battle in those dreams of his, muttered Marcus in between a long yawn. Wicker laid his father down, removing his leather boots. He pulled a wool quilt over him as he reassured Marcus. I will take care of him, I promise. Now go to sleep before you keel over and die. Wicker quietly moved across the table, making sure to grab the crate before entering the room where Ellicard feverishly thrashed and wailed. Slicing into the root with a small knife, Wicker held Ellicard's mouth open to let the juice drizzle in. Taking out a mortar and pestle, Wicker ground the dull weed and remaining sunwort juice into a fine paste. He gently removed the soaked bandages and applied the salve to the elf's wounds before replacing the used bandages with fresh ones. I didn't kill him. Wicker looked up from his task after hearing the hoarse voice. He dismissed it, thinking it was another fever dream of Ellicard's. Your brother. I didn't kill him. Wicker listened quietly this time. He glanced down at Ellicard to see if he was addressing him or not. I'm sorry that you lost your brother. How did you know he was my brother? Wicker asked, now realizing Ellicard was speaking to him. Ellicard gingerly opened his eyes. The morning light intensified his headache. I heard you speak of him, and how I was responsible for his death. You are responsible, Wicker snarled. I am, but my hand did not slay him. We have the same enemy, you and I. Ellicard coughed at the end. The sunwort juice had a sharp taste, like a fire blazing in his throat. Enemy. Was he not your ally that night? Wicker looked befuddled by Ellicard's comment. At the time, I would have gladly served by his side. By anyone in my clan. Not anymore. I tell you this because we clearly share a common foe now. My goal is to see you hang, Wicker growled as he shook his fist in the face of the half-awake elf. I am guilty of my crimes, I know that, but vengeance is a stronger form of justice. Don't tell me you feel otherwise. Wicker leaned in close. He remembered the night of the battle with Ellicard and his squad vividly. He remembered the elf that fought his brother, but he did not recall his name, nor did he know his true face, as it was covered by a clown mask. Who killed my brother? His name is Inlay Ebonpath. Like you, I wish death upon him, and the rest of my clan. Your clan did this to you? What did you do? Wicker asked, astonished by the ruthlessness of what Ellicard's clan could do. Ghastly wounds covered Ellicard's body. He was bruised from broken ribs and pale from the intense amount of lost blood. He clung to life by his sheer willpower and thirst for revenge alone. Wicker saw this and wondered what his clan could have done to warrant such an unquenchable hatred. Ellicard felt lightheaded as he tried to produce images of that night. Flashes of violence screamed through his mind like a diving falcon swooping in for a field mouse. He grit his teeth as his head began to burn up. His body pulsed with great pain, curling his back. Wicker placed a firm hand on Ellicard's bare chest. He dabbed a cold, wet cloth on his patient's face. Rest up. It seems we still have much to discuss. Chapter 46. The fog roamed from the river to the new sun cottage. The clouds rolled and churned ever so slightly as the morning sun shafts barely penetrated the mist to light the room where Ellicard woke. At first, his eyes cracked open slightly to examine the bedroom where he stayed. The grainy wooden walls were a dark tint of red. A silver chain bearing the silver emblem of Judeo hung from the banister of the headboard. A platter with a glass of water and an untouched sandwich sat atop an old wooden nightstand. On the opposite side of the room, Ellicard saw himself in a mirror above an oak dresser. Ellicard reached for the banister to support himself as he slowly attempted to get up. He grunted as he accomplished his goal, but now that he was sitting up, the next feat would be to stand and walk. Feebly, he rose to his feet, but collapsed onto the nightstand, knocking over the platter of food. Wicker and Marcus rushed into the room at the sound of the clatter. Ellicard leaned onto the bed, breathing heavily through the pain and stiffness in his legs. You have been out for a week. You'll need to practice walking to get the blood flowing through your muscles again. Give it time. You have plenty of that, Marcus said, helping Ellicard back to the bed. What's your game here? Why haven't you killed me yet? Ellicard said, grimacing from the numbness in his feet. It was as if 100 tiny daggers were poking the flat of his feet. Marcus turned to his son. Wicker, fetch Ellicott a glass of water. Be quick. I'd like you to be here when I present this proposal. Taking the glass from Wicker, Ellicott gulped down the fresh stream water as if he'd never had water in his short life. He gave his thanks before setting the glass aside. Well, I'm interested in your plans, so let's hear them, Ellicott said. For all the crimes against Long Whisper and the strife he had personally caused Wicker's family, finding why they kept him alive was a point of great curiosity for him. Ellicott, my name is Marcus Newson. I am a general in the Guard of the White Cloaks, and up until recently, I served as military advisor for the fledgling Long Whisper army. It is true that you were once a great enemy of mine and my family. You are certainly still an enemy of Long Whisper for obvious reasons. Ellicott lowered his head. But I believe in redemption. I do not believe that even you are so far gone that you cannot atone for your crimes and serve a higher purpose, finished Marcus. Ellicott looked at Wicker, who quickly looked away. A higher purpose? Ellicott seemed confused still. Ellicott, my son tells me you are an enemy to your clan now. I understand that it was them who left you in such a mess? Marcus inquired knowingly. Ellicott nodded, not yet ready to retread on that subject. The Black Rabbits are still a great threat to Long Whisper, and despite the hindrance that the ever-present soldiers pose, I believe that they are ill-equipped to actually bring down the Black Rabbits. Would you agree? Ellicott thought back on his training. How he was practically reborn in order to become a Black Rabbit. He had been bred to kill at even the slightest provocation. He was sure that even the strongest soldier in Long Whisper was no match for even the weakest rabbit. No, I don't believe your soldiers could survive an encounter with the Black Rabbits. I didn't think so. They would need specialized training tailored specifically to combat a rabbit. Marcus looked over at Wicker. An anti-rogue operative. Father, do you really want to go through with this? Marcus turned to Ellicott. Would you be able to teach a select group of soldiers to become rabbit hunters? Ellicott looked at Wicker, his scowl now replaced with a look of intense interest. They were serious. They wanted Ellicott to teach Black Rabbit secrets to soldiers to go to war with his clan. This is why they kept him alive and tended to his wounds. A higher purpose. This would give his life a whole new meaning, a better use of his skills than having them waste away in a cell. I am willing to do this. Marcus rubbed his hands in excitement. Good. Redemption is within your reach, Ellicott. This is merely the first step. Wicker looked excited as well, but then frowned as a large hurdle came up in his mind. Father, what of the king? Ah, my son. That would be the next step. Marcus grinned. Chapter 47. You were taught speed, prowess, cunning, and strength, all things in which you have become adept. In our most dire of times, you proved your loyalty. Where Ellicott failed, you will succeed. Inlay Ebonpath, will you be my first blade? Inlay knelt before Legion and Raijin. This was the proudest moment of his life, to become the successor of his master, Ellicott. However, this day could only have been better if Ellicott were there to see him. He raised his face, covered by the battle-scarred clown mask, and spoke 4 simple words. Yes, my high blade. Legion's eyes were emotionless. Without Ellicott, he no longer had the same passion for life he once had. He failed as a teacher, and he failed as a father. His son had turned against him and had attempted to destroy everything that he held dear. The philosophies that he thought Ellicott lived by were spat upon and disregarded. A betrayal he knew was inevitable after Jetta's death. He once wondered how a single push could be enough to corrupt a mind, presumably the same way that a single pull could save a mind. Legion shook away his thoughts. Then arise, Inlay, and stand by my side, Legion said, nodding to the shadow elf. It is a great honor. I shall not let my clan down. Raijin stood and walked over to the new first blade. Look at you, Inlay. Be proud of yourself.
Many would give anything to experience even a fragment of a moment such as this, child. Do not let those who would frown upon your accomplishment burden you.
My silent master, why would they frown? Inlay asked, a hint of sadness and confusion mixed in his voice.
Inlay, you were the student of the traitorous Ellicard. Despite your former master's death, his mark was left on the clan. 8 died that night, 12 more injured. He took my hand, all because we tried to free him. And how did he repay us? How did he repay you?
Inlay felt the scars over his body flare as he remembered how Ellicard looked at him with sheer spite. How he chewed up Inlay's love confession and spat it into the dirt. He stomped on his heart, on his friendship, and on the bond they had. I am not Ellicard, Inlay sneered.
No, you are not. But the clan does not fully trust you,
Raijin croaked.
They do not know you like I do, Inlay. They do not see your dedication.
How can I prove my loyalty? Raijin smiled.
I am sending you to Lost Dawns. You are to find King Koda and take his royal signet. Be sure to confront him and send a message. Do not kill him. Just send a message.
Inlay nodded at the directions. What will the directions be, my master?
The Black Rabbits still control Long Whisper.
Elisa waited outside the Silent Master's quarters, straining to pick up any information that she could. However, she only caught bits and pieces, nothing of any use. She had been back with the Black Rabbits for 2 weeks now, flabbergasted by how much everything had changed. Any friend that she once had was either gone, dead, or saw her as no more than a stranger. Even the rabbits with which she had been recruited no longer acknowledged her as a rabbit. She had spent too much time away from her clan to be of any use to the White Cloaks. The quarters opened up, and Inlay walked out. From what she heard, he was the one who killed Averin, a feat that, although she despised him for, was actually a badge of honor amongst her clan. She bowed to him, but he did not seem to take notice of her. Typical. Even the clown sees me as a ghost, mumbled Elisa. How are you adjusting to life back in the clan, Elisa? A voice called out to her. Elisa looked up to find Legion standing in front of her. Legion had always been the quiet sort. She never worked with him, but he respected her all the same. It goes slowly, Highblade, she muttered truthfully. You were a prisoner of the White Cloaks for years. I'm surprised they didn't hang you. You were tasked with infiltrating Lost Dawns. Had it not been for your relationship with Veda, we'd have sent a rabbit to assassinate you. Veda. Just another friend lost to the winds. She was once Elisa's best friend in the clan. She personally recommended Elisa for the job in Long Whisper. I never broke. They must have admired that, Elisa replied, trying to sound as convincing as possible. And Koda just let you go? Well, Elisa had not thought this far into her lie. When the White Cloaks dissolved, the soldiers there were going to hang me, but I managed to escape. The guards that the fools struck me with had a drinking problem, not to mention I had other tools at the ready. Elisa slowly ran her hand from her inner thigh, up across her exposed stomach, before resting it sensually in the cleft of her breasts. Legion was somewhat taken aback. I see. It's good to have you back. We'll try to find some work suited for a veteran such as yourself. Elisa held a weird and wiry smile until Legion left. She exhaled a long breath, sinking into the shadows. It seemed the difficult task of regaining the trust of the clan was yet before her. Chapter 48. The enormous Cathedral of Judeo had been built as a centerpiece in the mountainside city of Judeoheim. The city itself was a triumph of engineering, with its Gothic structures, towering granite statues, and enormous walls carved with the history of Judeo during the Night Wars. It was a black stone building, adorned with watchful gargoyles and decorated with intricate stained glass windows, depicting the heroes of Judeo's lore. Avalon walked down the tall hallway, banners of the Silent Ones draping the walls to either side of her. A depiction of a sun with a downward blade in the foreground adorned each banner with its white and gold colors. The arch buttresses webbed all around her. Keystones etched with incantations were inlaid on each doorway she walked through. Avalon's white and black trimmed coat billowed as she raised her hood. Her sword was sheathed on the small of her back. Her light armor scrunched up as she adjusted her leather armbands. She bowed to each monk she passed. She had found her calling as a Silent One, a holy warrior dedicated to serving the divine light of Judeo. It had been nearly 5 years to the day that she first stood in front of the massive golden oak doors of this very cathedral. Avalon pounded the cast ink knocker up the door for a third time before they slowly creaked open. Before her stood a round old man with a white wool habit draped over his pudgy body. He looked the travel-worn Avalon up and down. She reeked something fierce and was wrapped in stained tan cloaks. Her face was covered by a large scarf so that the monk could only see her fierce eyes.
You girl, what is it that you want?
Avalon undid her scarf.
Please, sir. I've been traveling for years to reach this sacred place. I have heard countless tales that this is the citadel of the Silent Ones. I have killed many to reach this place. I beg you, please, teach me.
The man stood silent, muttering unintelligibly, before walking back inside, slamming the door behind him. Avalon was motionless. Before she could knock again, the door opened. This time, a woman in a long white coat with a silver trim appeared before Avalon. You girl, what is it that you want? Avalon was silent with annoyance. She had just told the monk why she was here, and she did not care much for having to repeat herself. Speak up, the woman said sharply.
I am here to become a Silent One.
Is that all? Said the woman, clearly unimpressed. Why should we make you a Silent One? She asked, lifting up the ragged cloaks that Avalon was wearing in disgust.
I have traveled very far,
Avalon started. So have many before you.
And I have killed many.
So have many before you.
I seek redemption,
Avalon blurted out, fearing she would be interrupted again. The woman sized her up before arching her brow. It is true. You have seen your share of scraps. The life of a Silent One is not for the faint of heart. Do you have the patience and discipline required of a Silent One? Avalon nodded.
I do. Just give me a chance.
The woman rubbed her chin. I don't think you do. Avalon wove her hands and fingers together.
Let me prove myself.
The Silent One walked back into the cathedral, slamming the door behind her. Avalon stood at the door, waiting, wanting. For days she stood without sleep, without food. Even through the pouring rain and the deathly chill night, she waited. Days passed, and finally the door opened once more. The same woman as before gracefully stepped out. She looked at the shivering girl before her and spoke firmly. Walk away now, and I will see you are given shelter and food. Perhaps new clothes and a warm bath. Just admit, you are not ready to become a Silent One. Avalon closed her eyes. Her tears were cold to the touch. Walking away would have been an easier choice for a lesser woman, but she was not ready to give up herself. I will become a Silent One, Avalon stated, her diligent attitude rung in her voice. We shall see, the woman said, slamming the door in Avalon's face once more. 3 more days passed. Avalon shivered in the cold seaside air. Her tired body was giving up on her as she stood, swaying back and forth in utter exhaustion. The thought of the door opening was the only thing that kept her going. She could not quit now. She had survived becoming a rabbit, so surely she could survive becoming a Silent One. As she was reaching the bitter end of what she could handle, the round monk came out with a heavy quilt and bowl of steaming porridge. For you, ma'am, he said, trying to hand it off to a near non-responsive Avalon. Her hands trembled as she went to take the quilt and food, but stopped short. Her face was gaunt, her lips were parched and cracked, and her body shook from the cold that lay deep in her bones. I will become a Silent One, she said with a weak, shaky voice. You would rather die than quit? I would rather die than live another life as the criminal that I am. The man nodded, and quickly slammed the door. However, Avalon did not have to wait much longer to see the familiar woman again. I see that you have patience and discipline, but so have many that came before you. Avalon lowered her head, readying herself for another few nights of mental and physical torture. But, unlike many that have come before you, you show determination, a trait that we seek in all of our silent ones. You, girl, are ready to join us. Avalon's head shot up, her eyes wide with joy. Now quickly, come inside. You must be freezing. Avalon smirked. The trial that she went through was much harder than the training. More so because she was already finely tuned in her rabbit training. A silent one could fight hard, but she knew that a rabbit would fight harder. Perhaps this was the reason why she rose to the ranks so quickly. Perhaps this was the reason why the Red Wing wished to see her. Avalon knocked on the wooden door of the study with a quick rap. Instantly, she was beckoned to enter. The Red Wing's study was nothing more than a prayer mat and a shrine to Judeo. Several swords were displayed on the walls. The Red Wing herself had her sword placed on the shrine, which she prayed to. Iron Wing Avalon, remove your silencer in the presence of your Red Wing. Have you been taught nothing? Avalon bowed quickly and unbuckled her belt and scabbard, placing her sword on the ground. Forgive me, master. I forget who I am sometimes. The Red Wing turned to face her, an eyebrow raised. It seems that you forgot again. I am your Red Wing, not your master. Red Wing Savine, I am truly sorry. Avalon apologized, bowing several times before Savine motioned for her to stop. Avalon, do you have any idea why you've been summoned here? No, my Red Wing. How well versed are you with Judean lore? Avalon pondered. She was keen with combat and meditation. She reveled in the history of Silent One's battles, especially battles involving Judeo, but in the lore itself, she was no scholar. I know enough to get by, she admitted. Savine smiled. Why are we called the Silent Ones? Avalon knew this one. It was the same question she first asked her instructor. My Red Wing, we are called Silent Ones because we silence the night. What is our silencer? Our sword, imbued with a silver from Judeo's own blade. Who was the first of our kind? Avalon stopped short of this. She always assumed that Judeo was the first Silent One, but she was not. Autumn, sister of Judeo. When Autumn created the First Order, she took a vow of silence. Why? Avalon was not sure of this one either. This was getting into deeper and more obscure parts of Judean lore. She also wondered the purpose behind the quiz. Was this all a final test? She knew she had to make a guess. Because Judeo was mute? Yes, partially right. Autumn established the First Order the day Judeo lost her voice from her throat being cut during an attempted assassination. In homage, Autumn took a vow of silence. Another reason why we are called Silent Ones. Savine stood, taking her blade from the shrine. Avalon, you have proved to be a most valuable Silent One. It is time that you take on more duties. I wish to make you Silver Wing. I'm skipping a rank? Avalon gasped. Not just that. I wish to send you to Lost Dawns in Cyprus to start a temple there. You'll need the extra rank to start training Silent Ones. Savine said seriously. Cyprus, Avalon's old home. She knew that one day her past would catch up with her, but she was not sure she was prepared for such a day. Silverwing Avalon, what do you say? When do I leave? In the morning. I've prepared a platoon of 30 Silent Ones to assist you, as well as a Bronze Wing to serve as a lieutenant. Avalon gawked at the news. 30 Silent Ones? Why so many? Savine snapped her fingers. Ah, yes. I did forget to mention that Long Whisper is going to war with Estina alongside Varus. You will be joining the young king. Avalon raised an eyebrow. The news got wilder and wilder. Why would we be getting involved in such a conflict? With the Silent Ones establishing a presence in Long Whisper and Varus, it shows good faith to assist those countries in times of great need. Are you prepared to assist in such a task? Avalon had seen combat all her life. All she knew was how to take lives. Whether it be under the banner of the Black Rabbits, Silent Ones, or anyone else for that matter, it was all the same to her. Judea will give me strength, Avalon said, holding her fist to her heart and bowing her head. Amen. Chapter 49. Alucard poked his head out of the covered wagon. Marcus sat quietly at the reins, scanning the path ahead. Alucard had not been in Lost Dawns since he slew King Jalen. Now, the city was more alive than ever. He had never seen a place as loud and as crowded as this. When last he came, everything was so calm. It was as if the city itself was already mourning the king it had yet to lose. But now, the city was bustling and alive with the sound of joy. As the wagon approached the city center, Alucard could not help but be amazed by the sight of the elder tree. Its enormous branches stretched far and wide, reaching toward the heavens, and its roots twisted and burrowed among the lowest depths of the city. Once they arrived, Marcus led Wicker and Alucard through the castle halls toward the throne room. Alucard was appropriately shackled between them as a precaution. The three pushed through the large ebonwood doors and were met by a gasping court filled with nobles from the 7 noble tribes and the countless advisors Coda had in his services. Upon the sight of the chained assassin, several guards unsheathed their blades and rushed at Alucard. Alucard did not flinch, but held his neck exposed as if greeting his certain fate.
At ease, men,
Marcus commanded. Coda raised himself from the throne, his wolf growling with exposed fangs. Coda watched the nobles as they whispered amongst themselves. However, this time, Coda was not the child he once was. No longer was he helpless and scared. Fury set into his face as he rose Alucard into the air with the Magi. Coda walked forward as Alucard struggled with his new situation. With one hand holding the assassin in place, he morphed the other into several vines wrapped together in a frightening mask of tangled thorns. He kept his grip stern so he could impale Alucard in a single thrust. You have a mere moment to explain yourself, Marcus, new son. I will grant you that because the respect I bear you, Coda said dangerously. Father, this isn't going to work. Let's cut our losses and just hand him over, Wicker lowly said in Marcus's ear.
Have faith,
Marcus replied. Marcus removed Alucard behind him, away from the glaring king, and cautiously approached the steps of the throne.
My king, I bring not a rabbit, but an ex-rabbit. He wishes to serve you by hunting down his former clan.
Rabbit or not, the Kingslayer himself stands shackled and bound behind you. You will hand him over, and he will hang for his crimes. His voice was more stern and loud. He exuded authority, and his words resounded in the great hall, snuffing out the whispers of the noblemen.
My king, the Black Rabbits have not simply disbanded. They will find an alternative way to increase their numbers, and when they do, they will continue to hold this nation hostage,
Marcus retorted. Coda approached closer, although towered over by the size of Marcus's frame. Wild Eye closely followed at his side. In which case, the soldiers you are to be training will cut down any Black Rabbit threat. Coda spat harshly.
Your soldiers cannot defeat a Black Rabbit. I do not know how to counter their training,
Marcus said flatly. Coda was silent but furious. His soldiers were his only answer to the Black Rabbits, and here the great Marcus Newson was telling him that they were not enough to defeat his foe. He looked down at his familiar as if looking for advice. After a moment, he walked back to the throne and sat down. Tell me what this ex-rabbit is here for, then, Coda said, with defeat in his voice.
My king and lords, I propose that we use a former rabbit to kill rabbits. Alucard may, at one point, have been your most dangerous fugitive, but now he can be your most dangerous asset. He, under the watchful eye of my son, will train a squad of soldiers to become assassins that will have the knowledge and training to hunt assassins. They will be ARO, anti-rogue operatives,
Marcus explained, as if he had rehearsed this pitch many times before. Mayberry Leafsong looked very enchanted at the mysterious Alucard. I'm curious, Marcus. Does this criminal really possess the skills to defeat one of our soldiers with such ease? Marcus grinned. He had captivated the nobles, and convincing the nobles of this crazy plan was half the work. He winked at Ellicard, who seemed a mixture of bored and insulted by the question that Mayberry had.
My dear, this black rabbit would not bother showcasing his skill unless he was at least fighting 3 men.
Marcus waited as the nobles gawked in shock and excitement before continuing.
And he'll do it whilst still shackled.
Ellicard did not know how to feel about being on display like some circus animal. He knew Marcus meant well, but he seemed to be enjoying himself a bit too much. It was true, he could take out 3 soldiers even while chained, but his skills were never meant for showing off. 3 men ushered close to Ellicard, their swords poised to strike. Ellicard stood completely still, his hands, heavy with the iron chains, hung in front of him. The assassin watched as each man got into position, forming a half circle around him, before one man cried, slashing down with his weapon. Ellicard moved quickly, dashing into the swing of the man on his right, thrusting a pinpoint strike into the underarm of his assailant. The attack stiffened the man's arm, dropping his weapon. Instantly afterward, Ellicard swung the guard into a shoulder throw into the man that was on his left. Both barreled to the ground. The remaining soldier cleaved horizontally into Ellicard. With swift thinking, Ellicard tightened his chain straight, blocking the swing. Ellicard then flipped over the man and used his chain as a garrote to choke him.
Ellicard, enough!
Marcus broke out, halting the fight. Ellicard kicked the gagging man away from him and bowed to Coda. Marcus nodded to Ellicard as if silently thanking him before turning to Coda.
Ellicard is aptly trained. He told me that before becoming an enemy to his clan, he was of a high rank. All the same, a lesser skilled rabbit is still capable of defeating our men.
Coda held his words, watching his nobles discuss what they had just seen. They gobbled up the excitement of such savagery and chirped with thrill. They were like a flock of chickens clucking ceaselessly in a coop. He studied Ellicard. Then Wicker, who seemed to be avoiding eye contact with anyone, caught his eye. Wicker, you have as much justification to despise this elf as I do. I wish for your opinion to weigh in. Can I trust such a person? Coda asked. Wicker, who was leaning against a pillar with his arms folded, walked forward. He jeered at Ellicard before letting out a heavy sigh. This is beyond a matter of trust, my king. It is a matter of necessity. Coda slowly nodded. And what of the other rabbit? Wouldn't she suffice? Wicker knew Coda spoke of Elisa. While she could train the soldiers to an extent, Wicker knew that she would not be as willing or adept at it. It was true that she was a formidable opponent, but she was not the same as Ellicard. Ellicard was ARO's best hope to becoming everything his father wanted it to become. My king, Ellicard is the only one who can train our soldiers to be strong and brutal enough to defeat the rabbits for good. Coda looked at the wave of interested noble faces that surrounded him. They had bought into this little performance, but he had not. However, it was difficult to argue with such results displayed by Ellicard. I will need some time to make a decision. Until then, Ellicard will be held in a cell, said Coda. Ellicard nodded, allowing himself to be taken into custody. Coda sat with Wicker for a late dinner in the dining hall. Wild Eye curled against Coda's leg. Marcus had called it an early night and was slumbering peacefully in a guest room. Coda sipped the smoothing honey mint tea, taking in the sweet aroma. Wicker likewise enjoyed his tea. Their conversation was an echo of the one earlier in the throne room. You can't sit there and tell me that it is not a matter of trust, Coda said in between sips. Trust could play a small part, my king, but not as much as you might think. Wicker strained. What's keeping him from turning around and stabbing me in the back? Wicker bit his lip. He did not trust Ellicard either, but he did seem sure he could be trusted enough not to harm the king. His vendetta keeps him on our side. Vendetta? Coda asked, not knowing what brought Ellicard to their custody in the first place. His clan must have turned on him violently. They left him for dead, and now he wants their throats. As far as he is concerned, he would go to any means necessary if it meant it would take down the Black Rabbits. Coda tried to imagine what could have pushed a loyalist such as Ellicard to the point of no return. This vengeance, it will keep him on our side? We can only hold on, Coda said sharply, cutting Wicker off. Wild Eye snarled viciously. Coda received images flashing in his head of a shadow in the rafters. Everything in his mind screamed danger. Where was this premonition coming from? Was it from Wild Eye? His train of thought was interrupted by the clatter of a figure landing on the table. The figure was draped in a deep purple cloak. He was dressed in black and gray assassin's garbs. Belts fastened around his waist and legs held knives and utility pouches. A silver steel clown mask covered his face. His long hair was a vibrant purple, a color similar to Elisa's. In one hand, he pointed a sword at Coda. Wicker knew exactly who it was. "You!" he roared. "You're a difficult one to find, my king. Nevertheless, here you are." Inlay's voice was low, but sounded amused. "Guards!" Coda shouted at the top of his lungs. Several soldiers with long halberds thundered through the doors to come to their king's aid. Inlay chuckled, hopping joyfully off the table. After a sudden flash of action, he stood atop the table once more, wiping his blade of the collapsing guard's blood. Wicker unsheathed his sword, moving between Inlay and Coda. "I do not know why you are here, but I will have my vengeance all the same." Inlay cocked his head and snickered. Yes, you do look familiar. I'm guessing your superior did not survive his wounds that night." Wicker clenched his teeth, his anger overriding his collective discipline. "He was my brother." Inlay bowed. "I will then take credit for that deed. However, we'll have to play this little game later. I'm on Black Rabbit business here." Wicker rushed him in a fit of rage. "This is no game." Wicker swept downward, but missed as Inlay sidestepped him and ran forward toward Coda. Wicker rotated to his right and swung at the passing assassin. Inlay dropped to his knees to slide under the attack. Between Inlay and Coda, Wild Eye leapt at the assassin, baring his fangs. Inlay ducked and continued his advance toward the king. Coda jumped backward and manipulated Wicker's wooden chair to grow rapidly and knock the attacker sideways. Inlay, taken off guard, spun violently, crashing onto the table. Wicker did not hesitate as he brought up his sword at Inlay. Inlay rolled to the left and pushed himself back to his feet. "It seems this king has more fight in him than the former one," Inlay said devilishly. Coda hovered the chair in front of him, while Wicker circled behind Inlay. The shadow elf put a second hand on his sword, now putting more effort in his advances. Before Inlay could attack, Wicker and Coda both attacked. Wicker slashed for Inlay's head, but was parried by the rabbit's blade. At the same moment, Coda rushed an overgrown mess of roots from the chair, hurtling at Inlay. Always a step ahead, Inlay jumped and ran along the roots toward Coda. The king moved backwards, manipulating twisting branches from the neighboring chairs and table, but Inlay tumbled and dodged each wild attack. Inlay landed beside Coda and caught him with a sidekick, knocking him across the dining table. Wild Eye slid into Inlay's peripheral vision, lunging for the shadow elf's throat, but caught Inlay's forearm as he went to intercept the deadly attack. Wicker leapt forward with a series of steel flurries. Despite his other hand being held by the wolf, Inlay worked overtime to block the majority of the attacks before parrying the last into Wild Eye. Wild Eye yelped as she released her grip on Inlay. Inlay spotted Coda wincing from an unseen wound before the rabbit cartwheeled over the table to go after the king. Wicker jumped over to follow, but was met with a combination of kicks and punches, rendering Wicker dazed. Inlay grabbed Wicker by the throat, laying him splayed out on the cold ground. Recovering quickly, Coda attempted to cast another spell, but a trio of well-placed daggers lodged in the king's hands and arms. Coda hissed in pain as he stumbled backward in fear. Inlay dropped down and swept his foot, tripping Coda's legs. Spinning with the grace that only a rabbit could have, Inlay flourished his blade into Coda's face. "Don't fret, my king. I'm only here to bring you a message," Inlay said, grinning wickedly under his mask. Coda swallowed hard, still frightened by the figure towering over him. "Know this. We black rabbits are not threatened by your attempts to quell us. We still control your roads. We still control your villages. We still control you." Inlay confidently said the latter as he grabbed Coda's hand. With a vice-like grip, Inlay squeezed his fingers and removed a golden ring. "Use this knowledge well, my king, and have a pleasant night," Inlay said as he bowed and vanished into the shadows. After he was convinced Wild Eye's wound was non-threatening, Coda scrambled to Wicker, who was just coming to. You were right. Wicker eyed him fuzzily, his head still foggy. Huh? Bring me Ellicard. Chapter 50. The sands whipped in the hot winds as the dry earth cracked underneath the weight of her feet. All around her the crowds cheered. Night Whisper! Night Whisper! Night Whisper! It was all she's known for years. Her other name was like dust. It took no form or shape. It had no meaning. All that existed now was that of Night Whisper. Sweat dribbled down the side of her face. Blood blotched across her hands and armor. The sun above was unforgiving. A blessing for a cold desert night, but a curse on a day such as this. Across from her was a mountain of a man. He dwarfed her small frame. From his shoulders to his waist was intricate tattoos. Each represented a horde he fought for. His veins bulged over his rippling muscles. His jawline was hard and chiseled. His brow pushed forward, leaving his white eyes in a layer of shadow. He needed no weapon, for his bones and his hands have become rock solid over many years of breaking them over others' bodies and faces. Although the crowd cheered her name, she was the underdog. It was Uther Ironsoul that she could never defeat. Today would be no different. Night Whisper dashed forward, thrusting her short gladius into the abdomen of Uther. The giant man grinned with an arched upper lip. He showed that the pain was but another pleasure in his life, akin to the naked body of a helpless woman. With a heavy fist, he backhanded Night Whisper away, having her body slam backwards at least 6 feet. Dazed, Night Whisper found a spear at her side and flung it keenly into the shoulder of him. Uther took little notice of the protruding shaft as he rushed forward. Night Whisper stepped to the right and landed a series of jabs to his side, ending with a sturdy kick that would have splintered ribs against a lesser man. Not Uther, though. Grabbing her by the throat, he lifted her up in the air and brought her smashing into the ground on her back. Night Whisper's vision blacked for a brief second, hearing the jeers and gasps of the arena audience. Struggling to stay conscious, she came to at the same time as the large foot came crashing down onto her with a bludgeoning force. Screaming, Avalon woke up from her nightmare. Her breathing was a labored pant, her eyes wide with fear from a long past of trauma. She slid to the side of her bed and inhaled deeply, slowly trying to calm herself. It was only a dream. She looked around her cabin, calmly feeling the gentle rocking of the boat. She tightly gripped her blanket as she swallowed the nightmare to the back of her mind. Her cabin door swung violently open. "Silent Wing Avalon, are you all right?" said the Silent One approaching the room. She inspected the cabin, sword in hand. Satisfied that they were alone, she sheathed the longsword onto her side and quickly tried to inspect Avalon for any signs of attack. I'm all right. What is your name? Avalon swatted the Silent One's attempt to check her. Bronzewing Edema. I'll be leading your platoon in your stead. Avalon had struggled to keep from staring at Edema's strange features. Avalon had seen several types of elves in her travels. Mist elves, dune elves, shadow elves. But this elf had long black veins that seemed to carve cracks into her face. Her eyes were amber, and her hair was a pale white. Avalon brushed past Edema and made her way onto the deck of the ship. The waters swayed the transport boat in a soothing fashion. It seemed her nightmare only woke Edema, for the rest of the ship was quiet. So, you are my first blade, Avalon said, amused with the idea that Silent Ones might use black rabbit ranks. I don't follow my silver wing. Edema followed her out, still unaware of the reasons behind Avalon's terrified screams. Avalon walked out of her cabin and onto the deck of the ship. The night was cool after a little rain. She leaned against the railing, still visibly shaken from the nightmare. Edema rested her hand on her silencer's pommel and attempted to prod the issue. That must have been some nightmare. Do you need to talk? Avalon lowered her head and was silent for a long stretch of time. I left my past behind to stop the needless killing, to stop my needless suffering. However, before I reached my sanctuary, I was sold into slavery as a gladiator. With the black rabbits, they gave you a purpose. It might be a false sense of purpose, but you truly believe you kill for a purpose greater than yourself.
Do you understand, Adima? I admit, my silver wing. I could never understand the road you walked without walking it myself. I was trained to become a silent one as a small youth. It is the only life I have known. Avalon smiled. You and I, we may have grown up on opposite ends of the sword, but we are much alike. The Black Rabbits gave me a false purpose, but it was something I could hold on to. When I became a gladiator, killing was a means to survive. There was nothing noble in it. I admit I was good, but... Avalon gently touched her face, softly running the back of her hand over the several scars that riddled it. In her years in the slave pits, she had been beaten to near death over and over. However, like a bone that breaks, it heals stronger. Avalon was born and born again, harder and stronger than before. He was better than me. He could take more punishment, and he was stronger. I had speed, I had skill, but I still lost. I lost every time. And every time I recovered, I became more determined to end his life. I've never felt as much bloodlust in my entire life as I did when I fought him. Adima grew tense as she saw the look of murder creep up on Avalon's face. She watched as Avalon's hands trembled. It wasn't fear that caused the shaking, but excitement. Avalon? Avalon stopped as a flood of adrenaline flushed from her body. She noticed her hands were tightly clawing into the railing. Get some rest, Adima. Chapter 51. Veda kneeled before her silent master, weary and defeated. Her once crisp Black Rabbit clothes were now old and tattered. Her sagging eyes were a testament to the fact that she had gotten little or no sleep in the years that she had spent hunting her former blade sister. She held quiet as Raijin studied her. Finally, she broke the silence. Master,
Is she dead?
Raijin said, not letting Veda finish. Veda lowered her head. She did not have a real answer for that question. Her mission was to find and kill Avalon, neither of which she was sure she did. All she knew was that after hunting her down over 3 years, she was tired and wanted to go home. Master, I tracked Avalon to the desert realm of Scorch. There, I learned she was captured and sold as a slave to be thrown into the arena pits. I heard rumors of one called Night Whisper. I could never get close enough to this gladiator to see if it was Avalon, but she fought like her.
Is she dead?
Raijin asked once more. If she is Night Whisper, she will die a gladiator, or die serving as a slave, Veda replied, her head still lowered as Raijin glowered over her.
Veda, you have been gone for too long. I welcome you home. However, in that time, you will find that you have been replaced as First Blade.
Veda bowed. She knew that with her absence, the clan would have a new High and First Blade. She was no fool. It just meant she would have to prove herself all over again, a task she was ready for. My silent. Legion appeared at the entrance, Inlay by his side. A look of surprise covered his face when he saw that Veda had returned. He stepped further in the quarters, ushering Inlay to follow. My silent master, Inlay has returned from his mission, he continued, trying to keep from asking questions about Veda and her pursuit of Avalon. Veda looked up, eager once more to be a part of the inner workings of her clan. She studied Legion, but found him hard to read. He seemed to have love, loss, regret, and confusion swirled together in an emotional mess deep within his eyes. Veda was unsure what to make of it, but it was clear that she had missed more than she knew. The silent master nodded toward Veda.
You may leave us.
Legion quickly caught her arm and objected. My master, this is Veda. She was the former First Blade. I must insist that she stays. Not only does she need to get caught up on the status of our clan, but I value her opinion. Inlay's eyes lit up at the idea of being in the presence of some type of legendary former First Blade.
Very well. Veda, you may stay,
Raijin said quietly. Veda nodded, showing her thanks. Legion gave Veda a quick summary of what she had missed before having Inlay give his report. I have returned from Lost Dawns to say that the mission was a success. Inlay held up the glittering gold signet as proof. I defeated the Mage King, his wolf,
and a former white cloak, showing them that no matter how hard they fight, they will always be a step down from a rabbit.
A daring power play, Inlay. This is true. This will show Coda that the rabbits still hold power over Long Whisper. But we must do something about our recruitment situation, grinned the Silent Master.
If I may, Veda started, I heard through my travels that King Dallin of Varus and King Auric of Estina are going to war with each other, and that King Coda is already gearing up to aid Dallin. Perhaps we can use this knowledge to our advantage. Legion nodded, as if forming an idea. What we need to do is form an allegiance with Estina, find a way to sell our services and, in exchange, gain recruits from their soldiers. Master, I will travel to Estina and put this plan into motion, with your permission, Inlay said quickly, eager to prove himself once again. Raijin nodded in approval of Inlay's request. Master, I seek permission to join him, Veda pled, not willing to let her chance to prove herself anew pass.
Very well. The both of you must prepare to leave at tomorrow's first light,
Raijin said, dismissing them. You just got back today, and now you're leaving? Elisa whined as she plopped backwards on Veda's cot. She was thrilled to have her best and only friend in the clan back, but Veda was disappearing just as suddenly as she had reappeared. Elisa, I need to do whatever it takes to get into the good graces of the Silent Master again, Veda said as she packed a large bag. Elisa strolled over and swiped the bag over her head. At least tell me about this mission that's so important. You know I can't tell you. Now give me back my bag. Veda frowned, reaching to snatch back her belongings from her persistent friend. Elisa began tossing the contents out in a successful effort to annoy her friend. Can't or won't? Veda grabbed her bag back. Her reach as a human was longer than that of her shadow elf friend, but the damage was done. She had to repack. Either. Elisa stole the bag back and jumped onto the cot, holding the bag high in the air. Well, I'm going to make sure you can't pack until you tell me something. You forgot I held Lost Dawns in terror for a year. This will be nothing, she said, giving a smarmy grin. Elisa Moonshard, you are insufferable. All right, you broke me. Inlay and I are traveling to Estina to strike an alliance and gather rabbit recruits from its army. I'll probably be gone for a while, so you'll have to hold down the fort. Now give me back the bag. Elisa's eyes widened with the news. This was exactly the type of thing Wicker needed to hear. The sound of the door sliding open shook her back to reality. Inlay stood at the entrance. Veda, Legion wishes to see you. Veda nodded, walking out. Inlay slowly walked into the quarters, approaching Elisa. I spent a bit of time at your former home. My home? Elisa said, unsure of Inlay's intentions. You spent a good amount of time with the White Cloaks, Inlay said as he backed Elisa into a wall. I was their prisoner, if that's what you mean. That must have been a terrible time for you. Inlay came in close so that she could see his bright silver eyes underneath his mask. I managed? Elisa squirmed, trying to get past Inlay. Inlay thrust his hands against the wall, trapping Elisa. I think you and I both know how you managed. I've got to go, Elisa said, trying to push Inlay away from her. Inlay smiled fiercely under his mask, letting Elisa quickly walk from him. Don't go too far, Shadowkin. Chapter 52. Attention! Wicker's voice rang out across the large squad of young soldiers out on the parade field. Each elf snapped straight, their heels clicked together, and their arms fell flat against their sides. Listen up, men. I'm Sergeant Wicker Newson, a former White Cloak and current instructor of you Long Whisper lot. Wicker walked slowly, but intimidatingly, in front of each soldier before falling back next to Ellicard. This is Ellicard Freewind. He'll be instructing those of you who decide to join us. Wicker finished by motioning Ellicard to take over. Ellicard was quiet for a moment. He walked up to each soldier, inspecting their arms, testing out their balance, and checking their strength of their backs. He was pleased. These elves would prove to be excellent recruits. Marcus promised that he would find the best recruits for them. Sadly, Marcus would not be able to see his idea come to fruition from his outpost in Varus. "Sergeant, permission to ask a question," shouted a soldier at the far end. He waited for Wicker to nod before continuing. "Sergeant, we were told that you would be putting together a special unit that was specifically designed to combat the Black Rabbits." "That's correct," Wicker replied. He could already tell where this line of questioning was going. "Sergeant, this soldier's question is, who is this elf that is inspecting us, and what are his qualifications?" Wicker smirked. These soldiers were indeed well trained. "Men, Ellicott Freewind is not some random mercenary we picked up off the road. He is a high-ranking ex-Black Rabbit." A wave of sneers crashed over the squads. Another soldier piped up. "Sergeant, permission to speak freely." "Speak freely, Private," replied Wicker. "You expect us to take orders from a Black Rabbit? The scum of Cyprus. He's probably killed more of our people than we've killed of his kind. What if he was related to the killing of Jalen?" Several members of the squad rumbled in agreement. Ellicard walked up to him, staring him dead in the eyes. "You will listen to me, because I'm the only one that can teach you to kill those like me." "We'll never take orders from you," the soldier jeered, walking away. All but one followed him. "Well, damn," Wicker cursed. "I guess that went over better than I thought it would." Ellicard glanced at the one remaining soldier. He was a thin elf. He had messy platinum hair, vibrant sky blue eyes, and a slightly pointed nose. He grinned, showing off his pearly white teeth. "Do you actually know the rabbit who killed Jalen?" the lone soldier asked. "I killed Jalen," Ellicard said flatly, giving him his full attention now. "Well, then I would like to join your unit. Training under a rabbit isn't as interesting as training under the rabbit." Wicker waved him away. "There isn't going to be a unit." The soldier raised an eyebrow. "I'm guessing you need a few more bodies? Perhaps I can be of service?" Wicker looked at Ellicard, then back at the soldier. "What is your name, Private?" "I am Calsoon. I will lead you to your new squad." Calsoon led Wicker and Ellicard into the deepest reaches of the roots to find his first recruit. Keeping one hand on his coin purse and the other on his sword hilt, Wicker thought back to his last venture into the roots. The roots seemed to have decayed even more and more as the years passed by. Ellicard looked unfazed by the state of the city, but all the same, he kept his wits about him as they followed their guide. They stopped at a dilapidated tavern. Several apartments were stacked on top of it in a precarious manner. A maze of fire escapes and gutters framed the structure. Calsoon rapped on the front door. A peek hole opened before a gruff voice called out behind the heavy door.
"Password."
"Shadows in the wind weep silently," Calsoon whispered. The peephole closed, and the sound of chains sliding and locks turning clattered from behind the door. Soon the door opened, and a large black-furred Canis stepped aside. His arms were folded across his chest as he eyed Wicker and Ellicard suspiciously. "What is this place, Calsoon?" Wicker asked, with worry blanketed on his face. "Welcome to the drain. Try not to make direct eye contact with anyone. It's seen as a threat," Calsoon said with a cheerful tone. Inside the drain, the air was heavy with a musky smell that was mixed with the thick smell of burning tobacco. The window had a film of grime, letting only sparse light through. The tavern was loud with the sounds of patrons throttling each other in harsh scuffles and cat-calling of the bar wenches for a refill of ale. Calsoon, Wicker, and Ellicard had to watch their steps as they avoided broken glass and puddles of vomit still dripping over the tables from collapsed drunks. "I thought you were leading us to new recruits. Why are we here?" Wicker asked, his frustration slowly getting the best of him. "How much do you have on you, Sergeant?" Calsoon asked as he led the two to the back of the pub. "Dirty Don face? Why?" Wicker asked as he grew more and more anxious. The patrons of the drain leered at his clean, pressed clothes and straight, trimmed hair. Calsoon stopped another wolf-folk bouncer. "We're here to see Basilisk." The bouncer moved aside, and Calsoon beckoned for Wicker and Ellicard to follow him into a small room that served as an office. There, sitting behind a desk, was a sharply dressed, rather heavy-set human. He had olive skin and was balding. He was dressed in red nobleman's attire. A teal kerchief sat in his front pocket. He smiled once he saw Kalsoon, standing up with his stomach slightly pushing his desk away.
Kalsoon, my favorite runner. Do you have my 57 trait?
Ah, Basilisk, afraid I could only rummage up 30, Kalsoon said while bowing graciously.
What do you suppose you are to do about the 27 trait you owe me?
Kalsoon grabbed Wicker's sword and tossed it onto the desk. A finely crafted sword is at least worth another 40 knotted leaves. Consider the extra a bonus for your patience. Wicker snatched his sword back and sheathed it, now livid. Kalsoon, I order you to tell me who this man is and what we are doing here. Kalsoon smiled and bowed. Of course, of course. You see, our mutual friend Blavar has a small debt to pay Mr. Basilisk here, and if I can't find the money to pay it, he will take Blavar's hands as payment. Blavar would be a tad bit useless to us if he were to lose his hands.
Who is Blavar?
Wicker roared, still fuming. He is your soon-to-be recruit, a skilled thief and master of the throwing knife. Ellicard tossed a sizable purse of silver trit onto the desk, coins spilling off onto the floor. Wicker leaned over to Ellicard's ear and whispered, Where did you find that money? Ellicard spoke from the side of his mouth. When Kalsoon asked you how much money you had, I assumed having some would be important, so I swiped some from a drunk. Basilisk finished counting, looking quite pleased.
This will do nicely,
he said, snapping his fingers. A door opened up behind him, and two goons tossed a wily-looking elf onto the ground. His hands were tied, and he was gagged with a dirty rag. Kalsoon helped him up and brushed him off, later removing his gag. Blavar, my friend, I think it would be best if we made our exit. Outside on the streets, Blavar vigorously shook Kalsoon's hand.
I can't thank you enough, Kalsoon. I owe you my life.
My friend, as much as I'd love to say you owe me your life, it was these fine gentlemen that deserve your thanks, and they don't need your life. Well, not entirely. Kalsoon quipped as he struggled to free his hand from the vice grip of the ever-grateful Blavar. Blavar blinked at Ellicard and Wicker.
Well, how can I thank you too?
Wicker looked at Ellicard, who nodded before looking back at Blavar. We would like to recruit you to use your services to hunt black rabbits. Blavar smirked. Well, not my usual thing, but I'll join you. Trek knelt down to study the mud and stones on the path. His brother stood over him, blocking out what little light Trek had in the thicket. Which way? Rulon said, clearly impatient. Trek brushed his fingers over the wet mud while muttering to himself. I think you are distracting him, Rulon, a smaller elf said. Like her two brothers, her hair was a dark shade of red. She wore it tied up in a twisted bun. She sat down with one leg curled under the other, on a boulder, while inspecting the medicinal supplies in her haversack. Well, I think some of that mud is stuffed in his ear. I said which way. Rulan flicked the tip of his brother's elven ear. Hey, quit it! He went this way, Trek shouted. Essie, maybe you should stitch Rulan's mouth shut so I can concentrate better? Trek and Rulan dashed down the path and across the brook. As the triplets darted through the woods, Trek stopped suddenly. Rulan and Essie bumped into the back of their halted brother, nearly toppling him over. Trek, what is it this time? We are going to be the last ones to finish. Trek stared into a brush, squinting his eyes and going over various details in his mind. There is something amiss. We are being watched. Essie peered at the direction Trek was looking in. Well, I don't see anything. Guys, the finish line is just over there. I can hear everyone. We are going to be the laughingstocks of the rest of the scouts if we are last again. Trek turned to look beyond the forest border. He listened to the celebrating as another team of scouts passed the finish line. He turned back to the brush, but the feeling that he was being watched had subsided. Let's go. Trek, Rulon, and Essie reached the finish line with their peers chuckling at them. Well, the Windfoot triplets are the last ones again, chided their platoon leader. He turned to a group of men. Sergeant Wicker, you've seen them work? Any scouts catch your fancy? Wicker turned to Kalsoon. You are sure we want the Windfoot siblings? They performed the worst. Calsoon grinned delightfully as he watched Ellicard emerge from the woods. They were the only ones who knew I was watching, Ellicard said as he walked up to Trek. You knew I was there. How? Trek blushed, not used to receiving compliments. There were two sets of tracks. The first was from our platoon leader, and the others were very faint. I'm guessing you wanted to be tracked, but only by a scout with true skill. You have that skill? Ellicard said simply. I suppose, Trek said modestly. Wicker turned to the platoon leader, who was surprised by Trek's skills. We'll take the triplets. Lear laid about sluggishly on a swinging hammock. The sun was setting, and a nice breeze rushed through his shady retreat by the creek. He gnawed on a long blade of grass between his teeth. His long whiskers bounced slightly as a gnat buzzed on top of them. His long tail swayed back and forth, dangling off of the hammock. His ears twitched as he noticed a small group of people gathering around him. A catfolk? In Lost Dawns? Wicker asked befuddled. Lear opened one eye and retorted with the grass still clenched in his teeth.
This Yagati doesn't like to be called catfolk.
Calsoon bowed to Lear. Forgive Wicker. Despite his own origins, he is not used to the more exotic visitors of Lost Dawns. Lear rested his eyes once more.
This Yagati is forgiving. Be on your way.
Calsoon bowed again. Actually, my friend, they are here to see you, to test your talent, and perhaps offer you something you've always wished for. Lear snapped his eyes open and leaped out of the hammock, drawing his saber.
Who wishes to test this Yagati's talent? He who dares test the talent of Lear Crescentai better bring his own.
Calsoon smiled smugly at Wicker. Go ahead, Sergeant. Test his talent. He wants to duel me? Wicker asked, slowly drawing his own sword.
Isn't that why you are here?
Lear growled, annoyed by his challenger's hesitance.
Perhaps you are not worth this Yagati's time.
My dear Lear, haven't you always wished that a true challenge would present itself to you in Lost Dawns? You once heard of the great warrior clans of Long Whisper. Did you not wish that they would accept you as one of their own? Well, you may know that they are gone, but instead, there is an army, Calsoon explained.
Bah! This army is full of tasteless hacks,
Lear said as he leapt back into his hammock. He waved Wicker off and ignored his very presence. You just haven't been looking in the right places. Duel me, and I will show you that my talent is greater. When I defeat you, you will have a chance to fight for us and find the challenges you seek. Wicker stepped in, seeing where Calsoon was leading Lear. Lear twirled his saber in an expert display of swordsmanship before pointing his blade in Wicker's face.
You say you have more talent than this Yagati. Then show us,
he demanded as he moved once more out of his hammock. Wicker thwacked the blade away and dashed in close, slashing diagonally upward. Lear backflipped on top of the hammock, balancing himself effortlessly. He smiled cockily, then somersaulted over Wicker, smacking the back of his head. Wicker waited for him to land before lunging at him with a thrusting advance. Lear attempted to parry, but Wicker anticipated the technique and spun, countering with a skillful disarm of Lear's saber. The blade clattered to the ground. Wicker pressed his sword to the Yakati's chest.
Such talent,
Lear said in awe. The Black Rabbits possess more talent than I. If you join us, we will teach you to combat that talent, and you will win, Wicker said, sheathing his weapon. Lear grinned a wide and toothy grin.
You have a recruit. This Yagati shall join you.
Wicker and Ellicard stood in the tall grass of a wide field. A single wooden silhouette of an upper torso stood above the grass next to him. Calsoon wore his typical silly grin that the two men had become accustomed to. I'll bite first. Calsoon, what are we out here for? Ellicard spoke up. Wait for it, Calsoon said quietly. For what? Ellicard started, but ducked as an arrow whizzed past him and struck into the wooden target with a loud thunk. Wicker dropped down for cover. Calsoon, what's going on here? Your unit could use a craftsy marksman. I'm here to get you one. Ellicard poked his head above the grass. Another arrow whipped through the air, landing with another solid thunk into the target. I think you've convinced them enough, Timber. Why don't you come over here and join us? Calsoon called across the field. Wicker and Ellicard watched, stunned as the grass slowly grew and morphed into a standing mound. Tossing off the grassy ghillie suit, a black-cloaked, golden-furred Canis made her way to the small group. She brushed her long fur braid that was slung over her shoulder to her back. Her thin smile wiped away when she grew closer. This is Timber. She is one of the best archers you will find in this army, Calsoon said, introducing her to Wicker and Ellicard.
Calsoon tells me you two are putting together a special unit to deal with the Black Rabbits,
Timber said. Her voice was smooth and quiet, like a whisper. Welcome to our team, Ellicard said, still shaky from his recent encounter with her deadly aim.
The pleasure is all mine.
The new squad lined up on the parade field. Wicker moved in front of the squad, doing his best to instruct them how to stand at attention before addressing him. You 7 are the first of a new unit called the Anti-Rogue Operatives, or ARROW. You will be trained to think and fight like a black rabbit in order to better combat and counter a black rabbit. Your training will be tough. You may not like it, but you will like what you become. You will enter a soldier and emerge a new type of hunter. Are you prepared for this transformation? Yes, sir, the squad shouted in unison. Anything else, Ellicard? Wicker said, pleased with the new squad. Yes. Fall in, Wicker, Ellicard said sternly, his arms folded against his chest. Wicker looked at him, baffled. You were always our first recruit, explained Ellicard. Wicker smirked and fell into the formation. Recruits! Let's get to work, Ellicard commanded. Chapter 53. Imperious City was a dark metropolis. Ominous black stone walls spanned the city's perimeter. They loomed over the Shadow City, standing 100 feet tall. Hardened stone and mortar reinforced the walls, and blades guarded them from any who would dare to attempt to breach them. If the sun were in reach, no doubt the city would have blocked that out as well. The city itself bloomed from the center outward. The fine architecture of noble establishments could be found closest to the center, forming a gradient of deteriorating buildings and poverty that reached toward the shadow of the walls. The Estinian castle was the centerpiece of it all. Inlay and Veda found themselves moving through the city's streets with personal escort. The soldiers made sure no one came close to their carriage, going so far as to brutally beat any civilian that dare come within an arm's length of it. You look nervous, dear Veda. Have you never been to a city such as this before? Inlay asked, half mockingly. His knees were crossed, and he seemed to be enjoying the ride as best he could. But no matter how much of a front he put on for Veda and the Estinian soldiers, it was merely a mask that covered his true thoughts. On the boat trip to Estonia, he had heard horror stories of the king and queen. One, admittedly drunken sailor, told them how the king had ordered a peasant be publicly disemboweled for having the audacity to criticize a lesser nobleman. Others sang the praises of the monarchs. Inlay surmised that the truth must lie somewhere in between, but was nevertheless grotesque. However, his training as a performer allowed him to swallow his unease and move forward. After all, he had performed in front of much tougher crowds than this. I have done my fair share of traveling, Veda calmly replied. I have seen many cultures, but none such as this. If we do not watch our step, we may trip into a cell. Veda kept a keen eye on their escorts, who marched alongside the carriage just beyond the window. You traveled as far as the deserts of Scorch, yes? My troop never made it out there. What was it like? Veda took her attention off a grimly armored soldier to face her shadow elf companion. Lawless, she simply said, before turning to look back out the window. I see, said Inlay, smirking under his steel clown mask. The carriage passed over several bridges before entering a smaller inner wall, but stopped just outside the castle itself. Its looming towers sent a chill down Veda's spine as she exited the carriage. The entire city, including the Gothic-structured castle, was a far cry from Lost Dawns. She was in awe of the city. It was a different kind of impressive. The very architecture of the buildings around her sent chills scrambling down her spine. Imperious City commanded respect, and few would dare to refuse. As Inlay stepped from the carriage, a thin, tall man stepped before him. He was flanked on either side by a squad of men in glossy black armor. Each stood as tall as a bear. Their armor was decorated with etchings of ravens. Their left pauldrons looked like outstretched wings, with each feather denoting their different ranks in the metallic colors of gold, silver, and bronze. The man in the middle was unarmored, instead wearing regal noble clothing of reds and silvers. His sniveling face and slick-back black hair gave him the appearance of a rat. He spoke with an air of boredom and bowed in an exotic, over-exaggerated manner. His thick Estonian accent would have been difficult to understand if it were not for the extensive traveling that both Inlay and Veda had done in the past. Welcome to the home of the Divra. Bow to Osalin. Divra. That is the title they have given to their king. It means God King, Inlay explained. Although the Ebon Pass had never traveled to Estina, he had heard countless stories from merchants of the Divra and his great army. Veda nodded before whispering back. Who is Osalin? He is, I assume, Inlay replied, nodding toward the rat-faced man standing before them. They both looked blankly at Osalin before taking a deep bow before the strange man. He let out a wide grin. Rabbits show respect, but the Divra does not trust you, yet. Osalin snapped his fingers, and the guards marched forward, pulling out chains and shackles. Chain them, nice and tight. Squeeze them of any rebellion they may have in their bodies. Crush their bones if you have to. Veda moved to resist, but Inlay quickly grabbed her arm. Let them do as they like, we are guests here. We must make a good impression, Inlay said in the silent whisper of the rabbits. Osalin waited for his men to restrain the two rabbits before having them ushered into the castle. As he led them to the throne room of the Divra, he told grandiose tales of how an ancient raven bestowed King Auric and his queen, Natal, with immortality and great power. The raven promised the two greater than any other god so long as he helped overthrow the raven's rival gods. With such power, Auric had Estina rise from the ashes of the ancient dragons that Auric had slain with only his voice. Auric let the other civilizations blossom under his shadow and allowed the sun to burn as long as it paid tribute by transforming into the moon each night. In the end, it was the raven god that saw Auric as his god. Veda rolled her eyes at such stories, but Inlay was thoroughly entertained by the lore, though he was not convinced of it himself. It did allow him a quick study of how King Auric and his queen saw themselves. Osalin led them through two dark wood doors before halting in front of twin golden thrones adorned with jewels. Rich patterns of silver filigree intertwined into the gold, drawing images of ravens holding a crown and scepter. Standing before them was an aged man with a pointed beard and a mustache. He wore silk threads of silver and reds much like Osalin's, but bore a thick golden and silver chain around his neck that clasped onto a beautiful rare stone that gave off a soft glow. His wife was likewise dressed in a long silver and red dress with a cape of woven raven feathers draping down her back and along the floor. My dear Vra, I have brought you these rabbits that have traveled from Long Whisper to seek audience with you, Osalin said, making a sweeping bow to his king.
What are they? And why are they in chains?
Auric asked, puzzled by the condition of his guests. My love, they are from Long Whisper. They clearly can't be trusted, Queen Natal said with her elegant silk-like voice. She did not have an Estinian accent, and her eyes locked into Auric's as she spoke.
Keep them in chains. They can't be trusted,
Auric commanded. My king, we have come a great distance just to see you. It is an insult to keep us in such a state, Veda spat. Her tolerance for this circus had come to an end. Silence, rabbit, the queen roared. Turning her gaze back to her king, she gently rubbed his chest and brushed his cheek. My king, these rabbits are wasting your time. They have nothing of value to offer you.
These rabbits are wasting my time. Take them away and lock them into prison until I've decided what to do with them.
Arik said, motioning his hand to remove Inlay and Veda from the throne room. My Divra, we can't leave without giving you the gift we brought for you, Inlay calmly said, lifting his closed hand to the best of his ability.
Gift?
Arik asked, blankly. Inlay attempted to step forward, but was met with the clinking of heavy armor. In a moment's notice, several spearheads were pointed at his neck. If I may, my Divra, Inlay said, holding out an extended hand. Arik moved forward, confident that Inlay was no threat to him. He grasped the small object from the masked rabbit. Upon examination, he saw it was a noble signet.
The Donage tribe. This is the Long Whisper ring?
My Divra, I took it from King Coda Donage himself. You have no doubt heard of the Black Rabbit slew the previous king. However, Inlay trailed off. Arik raised an eyebrow, waiting for the elf to finish. This new king is quite the nuisance, Inlay chuckled. I removed his signet with ease, but I wish for nothing more than to remove his head as well. Inlay's mask quaked with the laughter that bellowed from the elf. Arik, too, erupted in a heavy belly laugh.
Your face is like a clown. You're funny like one too. This one I like. Unchain him.
Natal gracefully moved over to Arik to interject. My love, that is not a wise...
Unchain him now!
Arik commanded again. After the iron shackles and chains were relieved of Inlay, the shadow elf bowed graciously. My Divra, your kindness will be sung from here and back to Long Whisper. I will personally make sure of this. Inlay spotted the quivering impatience on Veda's face. Perhaps onto business, my Divra?
What is it you are here for, clown?
Asked Arik, sitting down on his throne. Inlay bowed once more before speaking. The Black Rabbits have sent my colleague and I to offer you aid in your war against Faris. We are aware of your might, but we assure you that the Black Rabbits would be a valuable asset to your forces. Arik fiddled with the golden signet again, eyeing its beauty and caressing the raised crest of the Dawn Edge.
Why help us? What do the Black Rabbits hope to gain?
We wish for recruits. We ask that a fraction of your soldiers be trained under Veda. Inlay gestured toward his chained companion. She bowed at the cue.
Unchain her,
Arik told the nearest guard. He turned to his queen.
What do you think, my queen?
Natal sneered at Inlay. She did not like to be undermined by a foreign elf, but it was clear even to her that the Black Rabbits could prove themselves useful in the future. You should trust them, my love. They are not your enemies. Arik stood, making a decision.
I trust these rabbits. They are not my enemy. Clown, what is your name?
Inlay, my Divra.
You will personally lead my Black Rabbits into battle.
I only ask that my high blade be at my side, Inlay said, quickly trying to adjust to the turn of events.
This high blade, he is your rabbit leader in Long Whisper?
Yes, my Divra.
Very well. This high blade will stand by your side. Come, we celebrate our new alliance.
Chapter 54. Rulin sailed through the air, landing hard on his back and joining his brother who was still grimacing from the soreness that throbbed all over his body. Lear and Blavar were the next to be sent flying into the air, flipping into a clustered mess on the summer's grass. Timber and Calsoon both joined forces for an attack but met a similar fate as Ellicard tossed them away, sending them rolling into the ever-growing pile of recruits. Ellicard shook his head in disappointment. He turned to Essie, who was anxious to come to the defense of her fellow recruits. She shrieked as Ellicard grabbed her by the tunic and sent her flailing head over heels onto the ground with an abrupt slam. Essie, are you a coward or a medic? You waited until your friends were tossed into a bloody heap before you decided to come to their aid. As an arrow medic, you will fight alongside everyone else, Ellicard said, lecturing the winded medic. Wicker, get them into their weighted vests. They're running another mile before we try this again. A resounding groan came from the recruits as the dread of a 5th mile set into their minds. The Arrow recruits had been training for the last few weeks under Ellicard's leadership, and each day they regretted signing up for such a grueling experience. Although the majority already served in the military, this level of rigorous training was not something that they were used to. At times, it felt to the recruits that Ellicard had a grudge against them. Ellicard, they could use a break. The men have been running exercises and routines for 5 hours straight. They can barely walk, never mind run. No one could possibly function under this regiment. Wicker intervened. Not even his father had him go through such physical abuse. Ellicard looked at the exhausted faces of his men. They were not rabbits. They did not have the same fear that a new black rabbit recruit had, and they did not have the work ethic that he was accustomed to. Maybe he was pushing them too hard. Run the mile with the vest. Then you can have your break, he commanded. Wicker brought Ellicard out of earshot of the recruits. You're pushing them too hard. They are not like us. They haven't been trained since childhood. You can't. If you coddle them, they'll never be like us. They need to be ready to fight men that have trained to kill since they were children. A rabbit won't hesitate to slit their throats. A rabbit thinks they've been commanded by the death goddess to bathe in the blood of their enemies. Our men won't stand a chance unless I train them like a rabbit. Ellicard, they'll break before they follow you. Ellicard shoved a weighted vest into Wicker's chest. A bone grows stronger after it breaks. The 7 recruits knelt in a circle on the edge of the tall grassy archery range. The sun had set, and the moon was giving Wicker very little light to go over his plan of attack. Ellicard stood at the center of the field, waiting for his Arrow recruits to try to take him down using strategy, physical force, and stealth. If they succeeded, then the month of gruesome training had paid off. If they failed, then he would double their workload to beat their failure into their bodies. We can't use weapons in this exercise, so we can't use our individual skill to full advantage. So this is how we're going to execute this. Ellicard stood motionless in the grass. His eyes were fixated on a lowly shadow figure walking on the outer edge of the grass. A decoy. Ellicard watched the figure for a bit longer as the grass began moving unnaturally in his peripheral vision. Keeping his attention on this new distraction, he was taken off guard as both Rulon and Trek dove at him from behind. 2 decoys? Clever. Ellicard threw Trek over his shoulder, quickly stomping on his face, knocking the young elf unconscious. Enraged, Rulon wrapped his upper arm around Ellicard's neck and locked his other arm behind Ellicard's head in a fortified blood choke. Ellicard did not have much time to react, as Lear, Timber, and Blavar soared from the bushes and surrounded him. Assessing the situation using the years of experience at his disposal, Ellicard jabbed his elbow sharply into Rulon's ribs, causing him to release the choke. At the same time, Ellicard swung himself over Rulon and kicked him in the small of his back, flinging him into Lear. Blavar came in from the side with a leg sweep as Timber jumped into the air for a high kick. Ellicard backflipped into the tall grass, disappearing from sight. Don't split up. It's what he wants, Wicker barked as he, Calsoon, and Essie came in from the shadows. What do we do, Sergeant? Asked Essie. Stay tight, make a circle, and watch each other's blind spots. Remember what we are taught. The recruits corralled up, scanning the tall grass in the blackness of the night. Ellicard made no attempt to make a move. The recruits grew weary as they waited and waited. Slowly, their eyes began to droop as the lack of sleep began to finally catch up to them. Stay awake, recruits, Wicker shouted, trying to keep their morale high. The moonlight faded as clouds roamed across the sky. All went black. All went quiet. The Arrow members peacefully drifted in and out of sleep as the soothing, chilled night calmly wrapped around them. He's here! He's here! The recruits were stirred awake by Blavar's screams as a series of painful kicks and swift punches laid everyone out with the exception of Wicker. Ellicard shook his head once again in disappointment. You think your recruits deserve sleep? Put on your vests. 3 miles now. What are we supposed to learn from you running us into the dirt over and over again? Nothing. I haven't learned a damn thing except how much I hate you, growled Rulon. Rulon helped a groggy Trek to his feet. Come on, guys. Who is with me? Ellicard's memory flashed to Izzy making the same stand against Ridge and Baines. Lear stepped up to Ellicard. You have much talent, Ellicard, but this Yakati wants nothing to do with this challenge. Elicard was stone-faced, as one by one each recruit began to walk away. "Give them some time, friend," said Calsoon before hurrying to catch up to the group. Elicard lowered his head. "You were right, Wicker." "I'm afraid I am," said Wicker, resting a hand on his shoulder. The Merry Wolf was a popular destination for the soldiers in Lost Dawns. Besides an excellent selection of regional brews, excellent food, and close location to the barracks, it also provided a small discount to those in military uniforms. The tavern was warm in the winters and cool in the summers. It had a rustic interior that harkened back to the small town inns that many soldiers were accustomed to, with a stone hearth that had a pot of lamb stew bubbling and ready for a hungry patron. The arrow recruits sat at a large table. Timber stared meanly at Rulon, who swayed sloppily as he slurped the final drops from his empty mug, still in a miserable stupor. Lear balanced his chair on the back two legs, watching the Canis.
"This Yukati thinks you have something you'd like to get off your chest, Timber."
Blavar looked up from his lamb stew. "She thinks we should have never left." Calsoon grinned coolly. "Then why did she leave?" Blavar shrugged as he leaned back, pretending to stretch and catching a small handful of copper trit from a nearby patron.
"I'm a wolf. I stick to the pack, no matter how foolish they are,"
she muttered. "I'm with Timber," Trek spoke up, favoring a large bump on the side of his head. "Elicard might be a madman, but I could feel myself getting stronger. I got stronger under him in 1 month than I would have for my lifetime under any other instructor." "Trek, Elicard would end up killing us before he'd be satisfied with our performance," Rulon said as he tried to wave down a server. "Essie, you've been quiet. What are your thoughts?" Calsoon asked, prodding the issue further. "I don't know. I agree with Rulon. Elicard's methods will kill any normal soldier." "Exactly, Essie," smiled Rulon. "But I also think that we weren't meant to be normal soldiers. We were meant to be arrow." "Did you say Elicard?" A nearby soldier approached the table. The thick stench of ale rose from his breath. He leaned into Essie and asked again, "Did you say Elicard was training you?" Essie pushed the soldier's face away from her. "Yes? What of it?" A small group of soldiers gathered around their table as the drunk soldier ushered himself back into Essie's face.
"Elicard killed our king. He's a criminal that should be hanged, and any soldier that accepts his teachings should swing beside him when he does. You're all traitors to your king."
The crowd of soldiers all echoed the drunken soldier's rant. Rulon stood up to the best of his ability. "That's my sister you're threatening. Make another move, and I'll show you what I learned from that criminal." "Rulon, sit down. You're drunk," Trek pleaded, trying to reason with his brother.
"Sober enough to beat this guy into a bloody pope."
Rulon pushed his chair away and staggered his way to the other side of the table.
"You mess with the 12th Spearman Division. You mess with all of us,"
shouted the drunk. Immediately, several more soldiers rose out of their seats, each sporting a 12th Spearman Division unit patch on their coats and tunics. The arrow recruits all stood to support Rulon. "We're outnumbered 7-24, Blavar estimated.
"The odds were in our favor. We were trained by Elicard."
Timber grinned.
"This Yukati admits he likes this challenge,"
Lear chimed in as he rubbed his claws together. The soldiers rushed the recruits, grabbing chairs and brandishing bottles. Several of the arrow recruits hopped up on the oak table, thrashing kicks at the soldiers, knocking teeth loose and breaking noses. Lear made his way through the crowd, slashing his claws left and right, dodging countless heavy punches. With expert footing, he twirled and sent a spinning heel kick into several chins, sending them flying into neighboring tables. Blavar's fast fingers, coupled with his new combat training, allowed him to swipe a belt and use it as a makeshift whip, slapping the leather across faces while still nimbly dodging incoming attacks. Timber jumped from table to table, making her way to the bar. A pair of soldiers climbed to the countertop after her, but were quickly dispatched with a series of kicks, followed by a shoulder throw that slammed one soldier into the other, sending them both shattering through a window. The Windfoot triplets somersaulted from the table and landed in front of the first drunk soldier. Trex swept onto the soldier's feet, tripping him into Rouland's oncoming uppercut. As he finished the combination with a heavy front kick that sent the soldier crashing into a nearby table, the tavern doors flung open, and a troop of city guards marched into the fray to bring a much-needed order to the scene. "Arrow, let's vanish!" Calsoon cried from the shadows of the back room. The orange sun cracked the skies as it rose, signaling for another morning on the parade field. Ellicott and Wickard stepped onto the field ready to start a new day of recruiting, but were met with a surprising but very welcome sight. Standing at attention in a perfect line were the 7 Arrow recruits. Their training uniforms were ragged and blood-stained, their knuckles were bruised, and their eyes had dark bags under them. It was very clear that they had not seen a night's sleep. Over their tunics were vests strapped full of weights. Wicker smiled at Ellicard, who nodded for Wicker to fall into formation. Ellicard walked up and inspected his 8 recruits as if checking for imperfections. He stopped in front of Rulin. "A bone grows stronger after it breaks." Rulin looked at his comrades to the left and right of himself before replying. "We are strong, but not broken."